It was a Thursday, and I remember because Thursdays were always the day I picked up dinner on my way home. Emily had texted me earlier, reminding me to grab something light and healthy, because she was trying to cut carbs again. It was one of those small, unremarkable moments that felt normal, except lately, nothing really felt normal anymore. Emily and I had been married for 15 years, and if I'm being honest, the last year had been strained. Not in the way where couples fight all the time. That would have been easier. It was quieter than that. Like there was a layer of glass between us, and everything I said or did just bounced off. I didn't know why, but I could feel her slipping away. That night, after picking up dinner, I decided to surprise her at the office. She'd been staying late more often, and I thought showing up with her favorite salad might remind her that I still cared. Plus, it was one of those nights when I missed her more than usual. When I arrived, the building was mostly empty except for the cleaning crew. The receptionist desk was dark, and the only light came from a few offices down the hall. I knew where hers was, so I headed there, balancing the food in one hand and my keys in the other. As I got closer, I heard voices, hers and someone else's. I stopped in my tracks, not out of suspicion but because the sound of her laughter froze me. It wasn't just laughter. It was that kind of laughter, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. Light, flirtatious, and warm in a way that didn't belong in the office at 9 p.m. I stepped closer, careful to stay out of sight. The door to her office was slightly ajar, and I could see just enough to make out her silhouette leaning against her desk. Across from her was a man. Young, confident, leaning in closer than he should have been. "Brandon," she said, her tone playful but commanding. "You really think you can handle someone like me?" My heart dropped. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, like she was teasing him, testing him, like she wanted him to prove her wrong. I stood there, frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Then he said something that turned my blood to ice. "Emily, you know I'm already doing a better job than he ever could." She laughed again, a low, knowing laugh. "Well, Brandon, you've certainly been thorough." The food slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. Both their heads snapped toward the door, and I knew I couldn't just stand there. I pushed the door open fully, and the look on her face when she saw me was one I'll never forget. Shock, guilt, and then defiance. "Josh," she said, her voice steady but her eyes darting between me and Brandon. "What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking as I stepped into the room. "What the hell are you doing?" Brandon straightened up, his face a mix of panic and smugness, like he wasn't sure if he should feel bad or proud. Emily didn't move from where she was leaning, like she wanted to make it clear she had nothing to hide, even though she clearly did. "Josh," she said again, her tone sharper this time. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. It was the kind of laugh that escapes when you're so furious you don't know what else to do. "It isn't what it looks like? Then, by all means, explain it to me, Emily. Explain why you're in here, laughing with him like I don't exist." Brandon cleared his throat, like he thought he had something to contribute.
"Listen, man."
I cut him off with a glare. "Don't say a word." Emily finally stood up straight, crossing her arms like she was preparing for a fight. "You're overreacting, Josh. This is work. We were just talking." "Talking," I said, pointing to the desk where her hand had been resting just moments before. "That's not how co-workers talk. And don't tell me I'm overreacting when I just heard him say he's doing a better job than me. What's that supposed to mean?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it again. Instead, she shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture that felt like a slap to the face. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said. "And honestly, Josh, if you're going to jump to conclusions, maybe that says more about you than it does about me." The audacity of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even trying to pretend she was. And Brandon? He just stood there, like he was waiting to see how far she could push me before I snapped. I didn't snap. Not yet. Instead, I turned around and walked out of the office, leaving the salad on the floor where it had fallen. As I made my way to the car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly, my mind racing with questions I didn't have the answers to. What the hell had happened to my wife? To us? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? That night, I drove for hours. The city lights blurred past, but I wasn't seeing anything. My brain was a storm, each thought crashing into the next. I replayed what I'd seen and heard in her office over and over, trying to make sense of it. The laughter, the way she leaned in toward him, Brandon's smug comment. All of it felt like shards of glass lodged in my chest. I kept telling myself it couldn't be real. Emily couldn't really be involved with him. Could she? But no matter how I twisted it, the memory of her laughter, so intimate and unguarded, didn't belong to me anymore. Eventually, I found myself parked outside my brother's house. Matt was the kind of guy who thrived in chaos, so I figured showing up unannounced at 1 a.m. wouldn't faze him. I knocked, and sure enough, he opened the door in sweatpants, holding a beer and looking half asleep. "Josh," he said, his brow furrowing when he saw my face. "You look like you just got hit by a bus. What the hell happened?" I didn't even know where to start, so I just blurted it out. "Emily. She's seeing someone else." Matt's expression went from confused to furious in an instant. "What? Emily? No way. Are you sure?" "I caught her," I said, my voice cracking. "At her office. With this guy, Brandon. He's younger, cocky, and she didn't even deny it, Matt. She just stood there. Like she didn't owe me a damn explanation." Matt pulled me inside, sat me down on the couch and handed me a beer. "All right," he said, pacing the living room like a detective piecing together a crime. "Tell me everything. From the start." So I did. I told him about the late nights, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she'd been pulling away from me. I even told him about overhearing that phone call where she sounded like someone I didn't even recognize. When I finished, Matt shook his head, his jaw tight. "That's messed up, man. You've been busting your ass for her and the kids for years, and she's..." "What? Flirting with some punk at work? No, she doesn't get to do that to you." His anger was comforting in a weird way. It made me feel less crazy, like my reaction wasn't just me being paranoid or overly sensitive. But then Matt said something that stopped me cold. "You know, this isn't just about her, Josh. If she's been sneaking around, there's no way this is the first time. Have you checked her phone? Her emails? Anything?" I froze. I hadn't. I'd never even thought about it. I always believed in giving Emily her privacy. Besides, I had trusted her completely. But now, that trust felt like a joke. "You think I should?" I asked hesitantly. Matt shrugged, his expression serious. "If she's lying to you, don't you think you deserve to know the truth? You're already halfway there, man. If it were me, I'd want to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I confront her again." The idea of snooping through her phone made me sick to my stomach. It felt wrong, but at the same time, so did the way she had looked at Brandon. The way she had dismissed me in her office, like I was some stranger barging into her life. I stayed at Matt's that night, crashing on his couch, but I didn't sleep. I just kept thinking about the woman I thought I knew and the stranger I had seen in her office. By the time the sun came up, I had made up my mind. If she wasn't going to give me the truth, I was going to find it myself. When I got home the next morning, the house was quiet. The kids were still asleep, and Emily was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of coffee, like nothing had happened. "You didn't come home last night," she said without looking up. Her tone was casual, like she was commenting on the weather. "I needed time to think," I said, grabbing a mug from the cabinet and pouring myself some coffee. I kept my voice steady, but inside, I was a mess. She glanced up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what? You stormed out like a lunatic last night. Care to explain what that was about?" Her calmness made me want to scream. She wasn't even pretending to feel guilty. "I think you know exactly what it was about," I said, sitting across from her. "But if you want to keep playing dumb, go ahead. I'll catch up eventually." For a moment, something flickered across her face. Maybe irritation, maybe worry, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Josh, if this is about Brandon, I already told you. You're overreacting." I didn't respond. Instead, I sipped my coffee, watching her carefully. She hated silence, and sure enough, after a few seconds, she sighed dramatically and closed her laptop. "Fine," she said. Let's talk about it. What do you think you saw last night? Her condescension made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. I think I saw you cheating on me, I said bluntly. Her eyes flashed with anger. Cheating? Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound? Do you have any idea how ridiculous you looked? I shot back. You and Brandon, all cozy in your office at 9 p.m., laughing like you didn't have a care in the world. Explain that to me, Emily. Explain what he meant when he said he's doing a better job than me. She opened her mouth, then closed it, like she was searching for the right lie. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. He was talking about work. He's new and I've been helping him get up to speed. If you're so insecure that you can't handle me mentoring someone, that's not my problem. The way she twisted the blame back on me made me want to throw my mug across the room. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up, leaned over the table and said, Emily, I'm done playing games. You can either tell me the truth or I'll find it myself. Your choice. She stared at me, her jaw tightening. For the first time, I saw something close to fear in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, she smirked and said, Go ahead, Josh. Dig all you want. You won't find anything. Her confidence shook me, but it didn't stop me. As soon as she left the house to run errands, I went straight for her phone. What I found would change everything. The moment the front door clicked shut behind Emily, I moved. My hands were trembling as I picked up her phone from the counter. She rarely left it lying around, always keeping it glued to her side like a lifeline. This morning, she must have felt so confident in her lies that she didn't even think twice about leaving it behind. I stared at it for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt. This wasn't who I was. Snooping, invading her privacy. It made me feel sick. But then I thought about Brandon's smirk, about Emily's cold dismissal of me last night, about her daring me to dig. If she wanted me to dig, then so be it. The first thing I noticed when I unlocked the phone was the message notifications. Dozens of them, all from someone saved as B. I didn't need to guess who that was. My stomach churned as I opened the thread. At first glance, the texts didn't seem incriminating. Discussions about work projects, scheduling meetings, a few jokes back and forth. But as I scrolled up, the tone began to shift. The messages became personal. You looked incredible today. I couldn't stop staring. Be careful, Em. You're going to make me lose my mind. Wish I could be with you tonight instead of stuck at this stupid networking event. My breathing got heavier as I scrolled faster. The texts became bolder, more explicit, each one like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Then I hit the photos. There was one of Emily, sitting at her desk, looking directly into the camera. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, radiant, alive, almost seductive. Another photo showed them together at some bar. It was clearly a selfie she had taken. Brandon was leaning in close, grinning like he'd won some prize, and Emily was resting her head on his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. The final nail in the coffin came when I found a video. My thumb hovered over it for a second before I pressed play. The screen lit up with an image of Emily, lying on a couch I didn't recognize, laughing softly. Brandon's voice came from behind the camera. You're so damn beautiful. You know that? Emily's response? A laugh and a whispered, You're not so bad yourself. I couldn't watch anymore. My hands shook as I exited the app and locked her phone. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and I had to sit down before my legs gave out. It was all there, the proof. I couldn't deny it anymore. She wasn't just emotionally checked out of our marriage. She was fully invested in something, someone else. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to care about hiding it. I was still sitting there, staring at nothing, when the door opened and Emily walked back in. Her cheerful "I'm home" echoed through the house like nails on a chalkboard. When she saw me sitting at the table with her phone in front of me, her expression changed instantly. Her carefree demeanor hardened into something defensive, her eyes narrowing as she realized what I'd done. What the hell are you doing with my phone? She snapped, crossing the room in quick strides. I stood up, meeting her gaze head-on. Why don't you tell me, Emily? I said, my voice cold. Why don't you explain who B is, and why you're sending him pictures of yourself? Her face froze for half a second before she plastered on that fake, condescending smile I was starting to hate. "You went through my phone?" she said, her tone dripping with mock outrage. "Wow, Josh, that's a new low, even for you." "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't turn this around on me. I saw the messages, Emily. I saw the photos, the video." Her eyes widened slightly at the mention of the video, but she recovered quickly, crossing her arms and tilting her head like I was some annoying child she had to deal with. "You're being ridiculous. Brandon and I are just friends. If you're too insecure to handle that, that's your problem, not mine." "Friends?" I barked out, a laugh bitter and sharp. "Friends don't tell each other they wish they were together instead of at a networking event. Friends don't send videos like that, Emily. Stop insulting my intelligence." She rolled her eyes, like she couldn't believe I was making such a big deal out of this. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Brandon and I have a connection, yes, but it's harmless." "God, Josh, do you even hear yourself right now? Harmless." I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. "How is any of this harmless, Emily? Do you even care about what this is doing to me? To our family?" Her face twisted into something cruel, her voice laced with venom. "Oh, give me a break, Josh. You're acting like this is all my fault. Maybe if you hadn't been so damn boring these past few years, I wouldn't have needed someone like Brandon to remind me what it feels like to be alive." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. "You think you're some perfect husband, don't you? Always playing the victim like you're this saint who does everything right. Newsflash, Josh, you're not. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. You put more effort into fixing that stupid garage than you ever did into fixing us." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "You don't get to put this on me," I said quietly, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. "I've been here, Emily. I've been trying. And what have you been doing? Sneaking around with some kid who doesn't even know what it means to be a man." Her smirk returned, sharper this time. "Maybe that's the problem, Josh. Brandon knows how to make me feel wanted. He knows how to satisfy me in ways you never could." That was it. The final blow. I stared at her, my chest heaving, and for the first time in 15 years, I didn't see the woman I fell in love with. I saw a stranger, someone cold and unrecognizable. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, smug and unrepentant. As I got into my car and drove away, I realized there was no coming back from this. The woman I thought I knew was gone, and all that was left was a pile of lies and shattered trust. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot that I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the house, trying to stop the whirlwind of rage and heartbreak tearing through my mind. Her words, "Brandon knows how to satisfy me in ways you never could," kept playing on a loop, a cruel mantra I couldn't escape. Every time I thought I'd hit rock bottom, the memory of her smirk dragged me deeper. But as the anger boiled over, something else began to form beneath it. Clarity. I couldn't let her get away with this. Not the betrayal, not the lies, not the sheer audacity of acting like this was somehow my fault. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop, I had a plan forming in my head. If Emily wanted to treat me like a fool, she was about to find out just how sharp this boring husband could be. I sat in my car, scrolling through my phone, piecing together what I needed. First, I called a divorce attorney I'd heard about from a coworker who had gone through a messy split last year. I didn't have an appointment, but after explaining the situation and throwing in the words cheating and evidence, they agreed to see me the next day. Next, I called my friend Tyler, who worked in IT. Tyler was the guy you went to when your computer crashed, or when you needed to recover accidentally deleted files. I hadn't talked to him in a while, but I knew he'd help me out. "Josh," he said when he picked up. "Man, it's been a while. What's up?" I didn't waste time. "Tyler, I need a favor. It's about Emily." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, this sounds serious." "It is," I said, my voice low. "She's been cheating on me, and I need help digging deeper. Her phone, her emails, anything you can find that'll prove what she's been doing." Tyler let out a slow whistle. "Damn, man. I'm sorry to hear that. All right, send me what you've got, her email address, Anything you know she uses for work or personal stuff. I'll see what I can do. I hung up, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time all day. Emily thought she was untouchable, but she didn't realize I was done playing nice. When I got home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. The kids were at a sleepover, so it was just me and Emily. She was in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I walked past her without a word, heading straight for the guest room. I wasn't going to sleep in the same bed as her, not after everything. As I passed, I noticed her glance at me, her expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity. "Still mad?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I stopped and turned to face her. "Mad doesn't even begin to cover it, Emily," I said, my voice steady. "But don't worry, I'm handling it." She raised an eyebrow, smirking again. "Handling it? What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, heading down the hall before she could respond. For the next few days, I played it cool. I went to work, took care of the kids, and barely acknowledged Emily unless it was absolutely necessary. On the surface, it probably looked like I was licking my wounds, but underneath, I was methodically preparing for what was coming. Tyler worked fast. By the end of the week, he sent me a file that confirmed everything I already knew, and more. Emails between Emily and Brandon that went back months, full of flirtation and explicit comments. Calendar entries for lunch meetings that lined up suspiciously well with hotel bookings. And the smoking gun? A string of emails where Brandon bragged to a coworker about his relationship with Emily. One line in particular stuck out. "The boss lady's got it bad for me. Honestly, it's not even that hard to keep her happy. Her husband's too busy being boring to notice." The rage that surged through me when I read that could have leveled a building. I had everything I needed now. The next step was my meeting with the divorce attorney. When I showed them the evidence, they nodded grimly. "This is more than enough to establish infidelity," they said. "We can start the process immediately. Do you want to go for the house? Custody of the kids? What's your endgame here?" I didn't hesitate. "I want the house, full custody, and a clean break. She can go play house with Brandon for all I care. I'm done." The attorney smiled. "Good. With what you've got, we have a strong case. Let's move forward." That night, I sat in the guest room, staring at the divorce papers I was about to serve Emily. A part of me still couldn't believe this was happening, that the woman I had loved for so long could betray me so completely. But the anger outweighed the sadness now, and I knew I had to see this through. The next morning, I handed the papers to her as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee. She looked up, confused at first, but when she realized what they were, her face darkened. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, slamming the papers down on the table. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly. "I'm done, Emily. You wanted Brandon? Congratulations, you can have him. But you're not taking this house, and you're sure as hell not taking the kids." Her mouth opened, then closed, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. But then her face twisted into anger. "You're really doing this?" she said, her voice rising. "Over a stupid misunderstanding? You're going to blow up our family because you're too insecure to handle the truth." "No, Emily," I said, leaning in close. "I'm doing this because you blew up our family the moment you decided Brandon was more important than the life we built together. This is on you." She glared at me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You'll regret this, Josh. I'll make sure of it." I didn't flinch. "Go ahead, Emily. Do your worst. I've got nothing left to lose." Her face twisted with rage, but I turned and walked away, leaving her to stew. I had made my move, and now the game was hers to lose. The days that followed were a storm I wasn't fully prepared for. Emily's fury was like nothing I'd ever seen before. She wasn't just angry. She was vengeful. Every interaction became a battle, every word laced with venom. I expected her to lash out, but not like this. Started small. She refused to sign the divorce papers, claiming they were unfair and manipulative. Then she began making these snide, cutting remarks in front of the kids, trying to paint me as the villain. One morning, as I was packing their lunches, she leaned against the counter, smirking. "Better make sure you cut the sandwiches properly, Josh. Wouldn't want the kids to miss Mom's touch now that you're so eager to get rid of me." I ignored her, but it chipped away at me. Every word, every look, every sarcastic jab was designed to make me feel small, to make me doubt myself. But the worst came when she decided to weaponize Brandon. One afternoon, while I was picking up the kids from school, I saw her standing near the entrance, laughing with him. He was leaning against her car, wearing that same smug grin I'd seen in the photos. My blood boiled as I watched him casually ruffle my son's hair, acting like he had some place in their lives. When the kids got in the car, I asked, "What was Brandon doing there?" My son shrugged. "Mom says he's her friend. He's nice. He said he might take us to a baseball game sometime." I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She wasn't just disrespecting me anymore. She was actively dragging our children into her mess, parading Brandon around like some kind of replacement. That night, I confronted her. "Are you seriously bringing him around the kids now?" I demanded as she stood in the kitchen, casually scrolling on her phone. She didn't even look up. "What's your problem, Josh? He's a friend. The kids like him." "He's not just a friend, and you damn well know it," I snapped. "Do you have any idea how confusing this is for them? What kind of message you're sending?" She finally looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Don't act like you care so much about the kids, Josh. You're just mad because Brandon isn't going anywhere. Get used to it." Her words hit me like a slap. The audacity, the complete lack of remorse. It was like she didn't even see me as a person anymore, just an obstacle in her new life. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. My attorney had filed the papers with the court, and the evidence Tyler had gathered was airtight. Emails, texts, photos, even receipts that showed she'd spent money from our joint account on her little getaways with Brandon. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was financial misconduct, and the court wasn't going to look kindly on it. When Emily was served with the official notice of proceedings, her reaction was explosive. "You bastard," she hissed, slamming the papers onto the kitchen counter. "You think you can just take everything? The house, the kids, all of it? I'll fight you every step of the way, Josh. You'll regret this." I stood my ground, my voice calm but firm. "Fight me all you want, Emily. I've got the truth on my side. Can you say the same?" She glared at me, her chest heaving with anger, but she didn't respond. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The lies, the betrayal, the constant battles. It was exhausting. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about protecting my kids from the chaos she had created. The next day, I made another move. I scheduled a meeting with the school counselor to talk about how this might be affecting the kids. I wanted them to have support, someone to talk to who wasn't caught in the crossfire. When I mentioned Emily's behavior and Brandon's involvement, the counselor's expression turned serious. "I'll make sure to keep an eye on them," she said. "And Josh, if you need additional resources or someone to mediate between you and Emily, let me know. The kids come first." Hearing someone else validate my concerns gave me the strength to keep going. Meanwhile, Emily's behavior only got worse. She started posting cryptic things on social media, little jabs that were clearly meant for me. Some people don't know how to appreciate a good thing until it's gone. Starting fresh feels good when you leave the dead weight behind. Her friends, most of whom I'd known for years, began chiming in with comments, cheering her on like she was the victim in all of this. It was infuriating, but I refused to stoop to her level. Let her play her games. The truth would come out soon enough. One night, she pushed things too far. I came home from work to find Brandon sitting at our kitchen table, eating dinner with her and the kids. My daughter ran up to me, smiling. "Daddy, Brandon helped me with my math homework." I looked at Emily, barely able to contain my anger. "What the hell is he doing here?" She shrugged, taking a sip of wine. "He's my guest. Last I checked, it's still my house too." "No, Emily," I said, my voice low but steady. "It's our house, and you don't get to invite him here like this." Brandon leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Relax, man. I'm just helping out." "Get out," I said, my eyes locked on him. "Now." He started to say something, but I stepped closer, my fists clenched. I said, "Get out." Emily stood up, her face a mix of shock and fury. "You don't get to tell me who I can and can't have in this house, Josh. This isn't up for debate, I said, my voice shaking with anger. He doesn't belong here and you know it. Don't make this worse than it already is. Brandon finally stood, grabbing his jacket. Whatever, man. You need to chill. He glanced at Emily, smirking again. Call me later. As he walked out, I turned to Emily, my heart pounding. This ends now, Emily. No more games, no more lies. You want to play house with him? Fine. But not under my roof. Her response was a venomous glare, but I didn't care. The line had been drawn and I wasn't backing down. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I was starting to win. After that night, the house became a war zone. Emily doubled down on her defiance, doing everything in her power to test my boundaries. She started leaving for hours without saying where she was going, slamming doors on her way out. When she was home, the tension was suffocating. Every word we exchanged was laced with venom, and the kids could feel it. I hated that they were caught in the middle, but I couldn't let Emily keep walking all over me. I thought kicking Brandon out of the house would send a message. Instead, it seemed to embolden her. She started bringing him around more subtly, dropping hints to the kids about how fun he was, leaving her phone unlocked with texts from him intentionally visible, even going so far as to park his car down the street when she thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed everything, and I wasn't going to let her win. The turning point came one Friday night. I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on a movie with the kids while Emily locked herself in the bedroom. She'd been on a work call for over an hour, but I knew better. Her laughter, muffled by the door, told me exactly who she was talking to. Halfway through the movie, my daughter, Lily, turned to me with a question that broke my heart. Daddy, do you not like Brandon? I paused the movie and looked at her, trying to keep my voice calm. Why do you ask that, sweetie? She fidgeted with the edge of her blanket. Mommy says Brandon makes her happy, but he makes you mad. Are you mad at Mommy? I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. This was the collateral damage Emily was causing, confusing our kids, forcing them to process things they shouldn't have to. I leaned in and gently took Lily's hand. No, I'm not mad at you or your brother, I said carefully. Sometimes adults have problems they need to figure out. But I promise you, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. She nodded, her small face serious. Okay, Daddy. That moment lit a fire in me. I couldn't let Emily keep dragging the kids through her mess. She had crossed every line imaginable, and it was time to stop playing defense. It was time to take control. The next day, I called my attorney and told them I was ready to escalate. I wanted a temporary custody order in place immediately, with the house and kids staying under my care. The evidence of her infidelity, coupled with her reckless behavior, would make it hard for her to argue otherwise. You're making the right move, my attorney said. We'll file the motion first thing Monday. Just be prepared. She's not going to take this lying down. They weren't kidding. That weekend, Emily hit me with her worst stunt yet. I came home from running errands to find Brandon in the driveway, leaning against his car like he owned the place. He waved at me as I parked, the sheer audacity of his smug grin making my blood boil. Inside, Emily was in the kitchen pouring wine. What the hell is he doing here? I demanded, slamming the door behind me. She didn't even look up. Relax, Josh. He's just here to pick me up. We're going out. I stared at her, stunned. You're bringing him here? To my house? In front of the kids? She turned, holding her glass like she was some queen issuing a decree. It's our house, remember? And I can bring whoever I want. Something in me snapped. I took a step closer, my voice deadly calm. No, Emily, you can't. Not when it's hurting our kids. Not when you're throwing this in my face like I don't matter. You've made your choice, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. Her smirk faltered for a moment, but then she shrugged. Consequences? Please, Josh, you're not scaring anyone. I leaned in closer, my voice low enough that only she could hear. You're about to lose everything. This house, the kids, the life we built. Keep playing games, Emily. See how far it gets you. Her eyes flashed with something. Fear, maybe, though she'd never admit it. Brandon, who had clearly been eavesdropping, poked his head inside the door. Everything cool in here? I turned to him, my expression cold. Get out. Emily scoffed. Josh, you don't get to tell. I cut her off, my voice sharp. I'm not asking, Emily. Get him out of this house. She hesitated, then turned to Brandon. Just wait in the car. I'll be out in a minute. He raised his hands, smirking as he backed out the door. No problem, babe. When he was gone, I faced her again. This is the last time you bring him here, Emily. If you do it again, I'll make sure the court knows exactly how reckless and selfish you've been. She glared at me, but she didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. That night, I sat down with the kids and explained, as gently as I could, that things were going to change. I didn't go into details, but I told them I was doing everything I could to make sure they were safe and happy. They deserved better than the chaos Emily was creating. By Monday morning, the custody motion was filed. I knew Emily would fight it, but I was ready. She had underestimated me for too long. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting my kids and finally putting an end to her reign of chaos. The storm wasn't over yet, but I could feel the tide turning. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. It didn't take long for Emily to find out about the custody motion. I had expected her to lash out, but nothing could have prepared me for the explosion that followed. I was sitting at the dining table, going through some work emails, when the front door slammed so hard the walls seemed to shake. Emily stormed in, clutching the court documents, her face flushed with rage. "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed, waving the papers in the air like a weapon. "You're trying to take the kids from me? You think you can just cut me out of their lives?" I stayed seated, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "I'm not cutting you out, Emily. I'm protecting them from this mess you've dragged us into. They deserve stability, and you haven't exactly been providing that." She laughed bitterly, throwing the papers onto the table. "You're unbelievable. You're the one tearing this family apart, Josh. You've been turning the kids against me, haven't you? Feeding them your little sob story while playing the victim." I stood up slowly, meeting her glare. "You really think I need to turn them against you? You've been doing a fine job of that yourself. Dragging Brandon into their lives, acting like this is some game. What did you think was going to happen?" She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare lecture me about what's best for the kids. Do you have any idea how hard it's been for me, trying to juggle everything while you sit there, playing the martyr? You don't even understand what I've been going through." That set me off. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "What you've been going through? Are you kidding me, Emily? You're the one who cheated. You're the one who brought this chaos into our lives. Don't stand there and act like the victim when you're the reason we're here in the first place." For a moment, she just stared at me, her chest heaving. Then her expression shifted, anger giving way to something sharper, more calculated. She crossed her arms and smirked. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "You want a war, Josh? You've got one. You think you can paint me as the bad guy? Go ahead and try. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not going down without a fight. I'll make sure you regret this." With that, she grabbed her purse and stormed out again, leaving me standing there in the wreckage of yet another argument. Over the next few weeks, Emily did everything in her power to fight back. She hired a lawyer, one of those cutthroat types who seem to thrive on chaos. She filed her own motions, claiming that I was the unstable one, that I was trying to alienate the kids from her. She even went as far as to accuse me of being controlling and emotionally abusive. Lies that sent me reeling but didn't surprise me. The court battle became a back-and-forth nightmare. Every time I thought we were making progress, Emily would find some way to delay or derail the process. She started showing up to school events with Brandon, flaunting their relationship like it was some kind of victory lap. I stayed composed in front of the kids, but inside, I was boiling. One afternoon, I got a call from the school counselor. "Mr. Harrison, I wanted to talk to you about something concerning," she said, her voice hesitant. "Your son, Ben, has been acting out in class lately. He seems distracted and upset, and when I asked him if something was wrong, he mentioned feeling confused about your situation at home." Hearing that felt like a punch to the gut. Ben was only 10. He shouldn't have to carry this weight, and yet, here we were. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice tight. "I'll talk to him." That night, I sat Ben down in his room. "Hey, buddy," I said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Your teacher said you've been feeling upset lately. Do you want to talk about it?" He looked down at his hands, his small face tense with emotions he didn't know how to express. I don't get it, Dad. Why does Mom like Brandon so much? And why do you and Mom fight all the time now?" I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Ben, what's happening between me and your mom has nothing to do with you or your sister. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people, even when they don't mean to." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with questions. "But if she likes Brandon so much, does that mean she doesn't like us anymore?" Hearing that nearly broke me. I wrapped him in a hug, holding him close. "No, buddy. Your mom loves you and your sister very much. And I love you too. No matter what happens, you'll always have me. Okay?" He nodded against my shoulder, and I held him until he fell asleep. The next court hearing was brutal. Emily's lawyer painted me as a bitter, vengeful husband who was trying to punish her for moving on. But my attorney was prepared. We presented the evidence, emails, texts, photos, and made it clear that this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting the kids from instability and shielding them from the chaos Emily had created. When Emily took the stand, she played the victim flawlessly, shedding tears as she talked about how hard she'd worked to keep the family together, while I supposedly withdrew from her. But her act began to crumble when my attorney cross-examined her, pressing her on the details of her relationship with Brandon. "Ms. Harrison," my attorney said, his voice calm but firm, "do you believe it's appropriate to bring a romantic partner into the family home while still married to your husband?" Emily hesitated, her gaze flickering toward me. I don't see why that's relevant." "It's relevant because it shows a lack of judgment and consideration for your children's well-being," he said. "And you believe that demonstrates stability?" Her silence spoke louder than any answer she could have given. By the end of the hearing, the judge issued a temporary order granting me primary custody of the kids. Emily was granted visitation, but only under strict guidelines. When the ruling was announced, she shot me a look of pure hatred. But for the first time, I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about my kids and the life I was determined to rebuild for them. Emily's reign of chaos was crumbling, and I was finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I knew better than to celebrate just yet. The storm wasn't completely over. Not yet. Was a crisp autumn morning when I moved the last of Emily's things into the boxes I'd stacked in the garage. The house felt different now, quieter, lighter, like the air had finally cleared after months of suffocating tension. The court had finalized the custody agreement, giving me primary custody of Ben and Lily. Emily's visitation rights were strict, and she was no longer allowed to bring Brandon around the kids. The ruling wasn't just a win, it was a turning point. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. But the scars Emily had left on our lives were still fresh, and the road to healing wasn't going to be easy. The first weeks after the court decision were a whirlwind of adjustments. Emily had taken to calling me at odd hours, sometimes to argue, sometimes to cry, always trying to provoke a reaction. But I stayed calm, refusing to let her pull me back into the chaos. One evening, she called while I was helping Ben with his homework. I let it go to voicemail, and when I finally listened to the message later, her words sent a chill down my spine. "Josh, you think you've won, don't you? But you have no idea what you've done. You'll regret this. Mark my words." Her voice was cold, almost unrecognizable, and for a moment, I felt a pang of fear. But then I reminded myself, she was all bark and no bite. She'd lost, and this was just her way of lashing out. The kids were adapting better than I'd expected, though it wasn't without its challenges. One night, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at me with big, tearful eyes. "Daddy, why doesn't Mommy live here anymore?" she asked softly. My heart ached, but I knelt beside her bed and stroked her hair. "Mommy and I just couldn't get along anymore, sweetheart. But we both love you and Ben very much, and that will never change." "But she doesn't love you anymore?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups stop loving each other the way they used to, but that doesn't mean it's your fault. Okay? None of this is your fault. She nodded slowly, though I could see the confusion still lingering in her eyes. I kissed her forehead and stayed with her until she fell asleep, vowing to do everything I could to give her and Ben the stability they deserved. Emily, on the other hand, was spiraling. Word had gotten out about the court case, and people at her office weren't exactly sympathetic. From what I heard, Brandon's reputation had taken a hit too, and he wasn't sticking around to weather the fallout. One day, while picking up the kids from school, I overheard another parent talking about how Emily and Brandon had broken up. "She came into work late last week looking like a wreck," they whispered. "I guess her boy toy got tired of the drama and bailed." Hearing that didn't bring me any satisfaction. It just made me sad. She had burned down everything we'd built for a relationship that was never going to last. And now, she was alone, with nothing to show for it but the wreckage she'd left behind. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild. The house became a sanctuary for me and the kids, a place of laughter and warmth again. We created new routines, movie nights on Fridays, board games on Sundays, little traditions that brought us closer together. One day, as I was cleaning out the garage, I found an old photo album buried under a pile of forgotten junk. It was filled with pictures from the early days of my marriage to Emily. Vacations, birthdays, moments that felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I flipped through the pages, my chest tightening with a mix of sadness and nostalgia. There was one picture of Emily and me at the beach, her head resting on my shoulder as we smiled at the camera. I remembered that day vividly. How carefree we'd been, how sure I was that we'd grow old together. But looking at it now, all I could think about was how much things had changed. That Emily was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And yet, as painful as the betrayal had been, I felt a strange sense of peace. This was my closure, the end of one chapter and the start of another. Months later, I found myself sitting in a cafe, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. A woman at the next table smiled at me. A warm, genuine smile that caught me off guard. We struck up a conversation, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of something I thought I'd lost. Her name was Rachel, and she was kind, funny, and down to earth. We talked for hours, and when we exchanged numbers, I felt a cautious sense of hope. I wasn't rushing into anything. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void Emily had left. But meeting Rachel reminded me that life didn't end with heartbreak. It was messy and unpredictable, but it was also full of second chances. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that you can't control what other people do. Emily made her choices, and they hurt me in ways I never thought possible. But I survived. I fought for my kids, for my dignity, for the life we deserved. To anyone reading this who's been betrayed, here's my advice. Don't lose yourself in someone else's chaos. Stand your ground, fight for what matters, and know that healing takes time. But it does happen. As for Emily, I don't know where her path will take her, and honestly, I don't care. I'm focused on mine now, and for the first time in a long time, it feels like it's heading somewhere good. The storm is over, and I'm still standing.